Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fourth installment of Taking Care, which is our series where I talk to mental health professionals about how to cope during this scary time. I'm Meredith Goldstein with the Love Letters column. And if you've joined us before, you know that, excuse me, I started Taking Care because in the first week of my own quarantine, I spoke to my therapist via Zoom for the first time. And I just thought I was so lucky and had a great deal of privilege to be able to talk to a mental health professional during all of this. And I was sort of hoping to share that experience with a larger audience. And each week we've had incredible, incredible people advising us, listening to questions, talking about their own stories. And it's made the world seem a little bit smaller for me and hopefully for you, the world a little bit less scary maybe. Our first episode featured Dr. Monica O'Neill, who is Boston-based. Our second episode featured Dr. Drea Letamendi, who is a pop culture expert who talked about healthy escapism. Last week, we spoke to Dr. Ellen Broughton from the Clay Center at Mass General, who talked about kids and families and how people of different ages process this kind of experience we're having. And today, I'm thrilled because we get to talk to Lori Gottlieb. And I'm a fan of Lori's, and she wrote an incredible book that ordinarily I would hold up, but it's on my desk at work. And I have not been to my own desk for many weeks now. But it's a wonderful book about her own experience with therapy as a therapist. It's called Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, and it's being developed for television. And just a little backstory, I was supposed to have Lori on our Love Letters podcast, and she was such a good interview that I was saving it for one big bonus episode. And when I listened to what we were talking about, it almost seemed like we were talking about another world. That since this social distancing became part of our daily lives, the kind of problems we talked about, it was just very different. So I was desperate to get her back on the phone and now on camera on Zoom in front of you to talk about the world we're now living in. So Lori, thank you for coming, and I hope you're doing well and have been isolating and that you've been getting through day by day like the rest of us.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. I'm happy to talk about all of this because I think it's so important that we focus on our emotional health always, but especially during this time.
So I'm going to ask some questions, and then we have a lot of readers who sent in questions, and I'm so grateful to all mental health professionals who come on this and talk about things that are beyond the pay grade of an advice columnist who writes advice for entertainment. It is a different thing. And I wanted to talk about sort of where we are now to start. Week one, when we talked to Dr. O'Neill, I was like, I had this vibe of resilience, right? And we can do this, and we're going to stay home, and we're going to flatten the curve. And there was a great deal of fear I was experiencing, but I also, again, week one looks very different than whatever this is. And I think that was probably actually technically week two or week three of this. But I feel in my circles, the parent friends I know, there's a different level of anxiety and monotony that is creeping up now that many people are long over a month of this. What would you tell someone who's saying that this appears to be never ending, and now I am feeling less drive to be resilient and hopeful than I was at the start of this?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think we need to acknowledge how hard this is. So, a lot of people will say, we'll try to say things to make it seem easier, like, well, it'll be over soon, or, kind of the way we talk to kids when they say, like, I'm angry, and we say, oh, over that little thing, right? We try to talk people out of it. So first of all, I think it's really important to acknowledge it's really hard the not knowing. And the longer it goes on, the harder it is, because we keep thinking that, we want to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And we don't know where the end of the tunnel is right now. So how can we be in the tunnel in a way that is manageable for us? And I think that's where all of these sort of coping skills come in, because we don't know how long this is going to be, but we need to develop really solid coping skills right now.
Yeah, and just by the way, I want to remind everybody that at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A space. You can absolutely ask questions in real time, and we're going to try to answer as many that we can. We had a lot of questions come in from readers ahead of time, but absolutely feel free, weigh in, ask your questions, and we'll try to get to all of them. Thanks for that start. I want to talk about people who are talking to me about concerns about vices that I'm hearing a lot. I never drink, but now I have a glass of wine every night with dinner. I that people are turning to things that they usually define as a cheat or as something that they shouldn't do frequently, but it's the part of the coping mechanism. And when should people worry about it? When should it be considered just part of the new life we're living? I'm someone who loves to have a glass of wine at a restaurant with friends. I don't think about it much in the house, and now I do. So when is it a concern? And this could be food, this could be anything that we normally try to limit our intake of.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a line between using things that are comforting to us to kind of cope with our anxiety and when it becomes problematic. And so on the one hand, I want to say to people, be easier on yourself. Don't be harder on yourself. So if maybe you're eating things that normally you wouldn't be eating, okay. If you want to have a glass of wine, have a glass of wine. If you find that you are getting to a place where it's interfering with your functioning, right? You're drinking so much that you can't really function well. You're eating so much that you're starting to feel bad. That's where you want to say, what are some other ways that I can cope with these big feelings that I'm having that doesn't involve self-destructing? So sometimes what we do is we try to numb out our feelings with substances, whether that's food or wine or being on the internet all the time, right? Which is a colleague of mine said that the internet was the most effective short-term non-prescription painkiller out there. But actually, it's not really that great for us to be on all the time. So what are some other coping mechanisms that you can develop that are going to actually nourish you and not deplete you? If you try to numb your feelings, they don't go away. Temporarily, you might feel like they do, but actually they just get stronger because they need an outlet. So what's a healthy outlet for your feelings?
One of the things that your book makes me think of and your work makes me think of when you write about being a therapist and you write about the idea of therapists being human, which is something I sometimes forget. I think about my own therapist, who I will see virtually tomorrow morning, and what she must be going through. I mean, this is such a strange time where people in the mental health profession all at once are experiencing exactly the same thing in different ways, and having to be a sounding board to people who are going through it as well. And I'm sure this happens sometimes where you're going through your own personal stuff and also managing the anxieties and the experiences of others, but this is different. And I wanted to know a little bit about your background and what you can tell us about people who are in the health industry, but on the mental health side, because right now we're hearing a lot about the incredible people who are working in hospitals, and I think that the extension of that is all of the people who are helping a world that is going through something right now.
Yeah. Well, in terms of my background, I've written extensively about how important I think it is for people to realize that we're no different from our patients. And I think that helps us. I say, even at the beginning of my book, that my greatest credential is that I'm a card-carrying member of the human race. So I think that when people come to me now and they say, are you scared? Or how are you managing this, right? We're not robots. We're not this like blank wall. Nobody wants to talk to a blank wall. So while, we certainly have boundaries, I don't think it helps people to pretend that I'm not worried at times. And so I will say, yeah, I'm worried at times, and here's how I'm managing, and here are some strategies for you that might help you in your life to manage. So I think there's that. And I think also it's really important for healthcare workers of any sort to take care of themselves, because it's really easy to burn out, because I'm doing sessions all day long and I'm hearing lots of stories. Many of them are very disturbing stories. And it's hard, but I'm also hearing a lot of uplifting stories and stories of resilience and stories of flexibility and adaptability. And there are funny moments that happen, like people's cats are crawling across the screens and, like on these virtual sessions, or a couple is having like a really lovely moment together and the screen freezes and they don't know that I can't, that they're frozen for me. There's all these sort of things that you can laugh about too.
I want to get to our reader questions. Some of them are very specific, some are more general. They're all pretty fantastic. So thank you, readers and people who engage with the Globe, for sending this in. The first question is, my boyfriend and I are pushing 70, coming together in the past few years after having known and liked each other for more than 40 years. We spend only weekends together so far because he is now the sole caregiver for his recently widowed mother. In this scary and unsettling time, we want very much to be together and look forward to the day that we can be, but we both feel it is unwise to risk exposing his mother to this virus. Are we being too careful? We go for walks and bike rides. We do social distancing, but how do we navigate this time? And of course, some of this is a medical doctor type question, but I'm hearing a lot of stories about couples that can't really engage in person the way they would like to. And what do you do to keep up this sort of intimacy that you've worked so hard to build?
Yeah, so this is really common where you have couples. There are couples who are normally long distance couples and they come up with all kinds of strategies. But what happens when all of a sudden you become a long distance couple, meaning like you're not in the same, you can't really be together in the same, indoor space. How do you stay connected? And I think that, you don't have a lot of experience with this yet because you haven't done it. But a lot of what people do is that, when you're talking to your partner, it's not just like, what are you doing today? Because by the way, nobody's doing anything that interesting right now. It's more about can you have those deeper conversations? Can you talk about, how are you feeling about this? What's going on with you? Can you share funny things with each other? Can you do things that you would normally do in the same space, but separately? Like Netflix has this app where you can watch shows at the same time so that they're synced. So you're actually watching the same thing at the same time. Can you have a virtual dance party with each other? What can you do together on a screen that's not going to be the same, but it's something where you're not just sitting there talking about the coronavirus all the time. You have to remember that you have a relationship that exists outside of that too.
I think what you just said applies to this next question as well. And I swear it did not come from me. It's from a reader who says, what's your best advice for a single woman living alone in quarantine? And what you just said about Netflix, I was thinking about the things I miss most besides the Cheesecake Factory, which I think about every day. But it's sitting on a couch and watching TV with my friends. And I'm looking for any app or any technology that allows me to consume media with the people I care about. So what do you recommend for people who are really alone during this? Might be scary.
Well, I'll tell you something funny about that. So I have patients who are single and I have patients who are in families. And the patients who are in families will tell me that they are so sick of the people in their own homes that they are so excited when their single friends call. They're like, they can't wait for those calls. They're like, I get to talk about normal things. I get to talk about things, that I don't have the same people in the house where they make the same jokes. I know their stories. I know all that. They want the break from the people in their own homes. The single people have told me, like, I don't want to call other people. I don't want to reach out because I'm going to be, they have so much on their plate. They're dealing with kids, they're dealing with partners, they're dealing with all this stuff. Please call them. They want to hear from you, these families. Single people, reach out. People are dying to hear from you. You are the beacon of light in their day. And also you will get something out of it, of course, because you get to reach out and connect with people. And you have to realize that just because you are alone in your home, you're dealing with a lot of the same issues that they're dealing with too. So yes, some of the issues are different, but a lot of the anxiety, a lot of the, questions about routine being disrupted, a lot of the questions about, how long is this going to go on? All of the things that we've had to give up, all of that we have in common. I think we all have much more in common than we imagine, no matter what kind of situation we have, in our four walls.
It's so odd. It's sort of the opposite of grass is greener. As a single person, I think about my friends and couples and friends who might have children, whether they're single or otherwise. And I'm like, it looks so hard to be them right now. And they're calling me and saying, wow, you're all alone. And I'm like, yeah, and I only have to entertain myself. So I do think it's this, we're all really worried about each other. And whenever I reach out or they reach out, I think we better appreciate our own situation and perhaps get help with theirs. But
yeah, I think sometimes we lose sort of the benefits of our situation. And so I think it's important to remember what you have, but also I think it's important not to compare who's having a harder time, right?
Well,
So
can we talk about that? Because, I just read Ann Helen Peterson story in BuzzFeed about shaming, right? About shaming of people going out. And I think a lot about people who feel ashamed, people who feel guilty that their hardships aren't greater. I feel for every blessing I have and all this gratitude I have for what I do have in my life, the fact that I have a computer to be able to do this with you, I then feel bad, right? There are people who have less. It's like very difficult to balance your own situation with the experience of everyone around you. And that can be a really overwhelming thing. So how do you talk to people about, accepting what they have, being productive, about, helping others, acknowledging what they don't have? How does this puzzle work in our brains?
Yeah. So we're all going through this collective loss, this collective grief. And this isn't the grief Olympics. This isn't the loss Olympics. We don't need to compare whose loss is bigger or smaller or feel guilty about feeling the loss that we feel, even if it isn't something like the death of somebody or the loss of our own health or somebody's health, of a loved one. So I think that what happens is we feel like, wow, this is really hard and I lost whatever you're losing, right? We're all losing different things. It's kind of like when somebody has a breakup, but they didn't have a divorce. People will feel like, oh, they'll get over that quickly because it was breakup, not a divorce. It's like, no, there's no hierarchy of pain. There's no hierarchy of loss. Pain is pain, loss is loss. And so I think we need to have compassion for one another, whatever their losses are, and not think, oh, well, they have it so good. What are they complaining about? Right? Yeah. I think this is a really unprecedented time, and it's really hard on everyone in different ways. And if we can have more compassion for each other, we will learn to have more compassion for ourselves. And that's the most important part, is we need to have compassion for ourselves right now. Instead of minimizing what we're feeling, instead of minimizing our losses, it's okay to feel that. It will help you if you acknowledge what you're going through instead of pretending that it doesn't exist.
We have a question from someone who asks how to deal with a spouse who doesn't share your same fears, worries about staying healthy during the pandemic and about having enough food and supplies. And I will also say that right before we logged on today, I received an email from someone who said, my husband has just made arrangements to go buy a used kayak. Why can't he just stay in the house? Like, apparently he's finding these strange reasons to go off and do things at a distance, but that, this writer felt still put them both at risk.
Yeah, that comes up all the time. So, I think that couples get together because of what they have in common, but the strength of the relationship is really about how they tolerate their differences. And a big difference that most couples have is somebody is more of a worrier and somebody's more laid back, just in general, even outside of the coronavirus. And then you get to the coronavirus where you have people saying, well, you're overreacting to this. And the other person saying, well, you're underreacting to this. And so really, instead of fighting about like the content of the conversation, which is, whether or not he can go get the kayak, it's really like, how are you managing your anxiety? Like, is this helping you to go out, or do you need to get out more? Is there a safer way to get out? Like maybe you could take a walk with a mask on. Do you need to go interact with other people? Let's talk about how we can, manage anxiety in a way where everybody feels safe. And that's where the conversation goes, not so much about you're allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do that. And I see this also, by the way, in divorced couples where the kids are going back and forth between two homes, and one home has different rules about how to, follow the guidelines around what we're supposed to do with being safe. And another household has different guidelines, who's allowed to see whom, and then what happens when the kids expose the other household. So these conversations are so important to have.
Yeah, we just got this in and I'm going to read it from my phone, so bear with me. This is from Anonymous. Sex with my partner during COVID. My argument is that the obsession with hand washing and cleanliness is making me not want to have sex, and my boyfriend thinks all the stress and free time makes him want it more. What do you think? I know neither of us is right or wrong. This is not a question I expected to get.
Yeah, it's actually a really common question. So a lot of people are dealing with the same thing. And again, it's not so much, I think you have to really understand, well, the person who's so worried, what are they worried about will happen? They're already exposed. And I'm not giving medical advice here, just to be clear. But what are they worried is going to happen when they're already in the same household with this person and probably very close to this person? Is it more an emotional thing where the person says, like, I just don't feel like having sex right now because I'm in a bad place, which is different from I'm worried about the germs. I'm worried about the virus.
Right. Someone asks, what might our dreams tell us about how we're dealing during this strange time? And I've read a bunch of things about how dreams are really vivid right now. And I think I might have mentioned last week that I have had multiple dreams about Ben Affleck, which is like kind of a Boston thing. They are completely platonic dreams, but I think it's because there have been a lot of celebrity photos, right, of him, and sometimes he won't be wearing a mask, and then people will, it's like he's just walking with coffee probably somewhere in Los Angeles, and it's like such a Boston thing to wake up having had a dream of Ben Affleck. But I'm wondering why these dreams are so vivid, and I see this a lot, that people are talking about this, that this isolation has turned their dream time into something very strange.
Mhm. I think our dreams are so vivid right now because we're spending so much emotional real estate on the coronavirus when we're awake that we don't really have time to reflect about what's going on underneath that. And so when we're sleeping, we kind of make up for that. And all the stuff that we haven't had time to think about, kind of all the themes that we're thinking about, those are appearing while we're sleeping. And also, I should say that current trauma often triggers past trauma. So a lot of people are experiencing trauma right now of some sort or another. And it brings up earlier times in our lives when we may have experienced this kind of anxiety, this kind of fear, some kind of trauma, some kind of big change. And a lot of people are dreaming about that too.
This is from Anonymous. How do you live with someone in quarantine when the relationship was heading for divorce after 40 years?
Yeah, I would say with a lot of grace. You know, I think this is where you want to find what the person is doing well and what the person is doing right and what you're grateful for, even if you're not going to be together possibly. Look for the good qualities in the other person, and that will help them to see the good qualities in you too. This is the time to be incredibly kind and graceful, not just in this situation where you might split up, but with anybody that you're around right now. Look for what they're doing right, look for what they're doing well, and do that to yourself too.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. This is a question, Meredith and Lori. I was wondering if you could address how single young adults, 20s and 30s, specifically can deal with this uncertainty of their future, ability to meet new partners, etc., and self-care in the present related to this. And furthermore, how not to let this frustration affect our relationships with our family at home during this time. Thanks in advance. I can right off the bat say that this is 20s and 30s. It's like, this is affecting everyone, but I know that for younger people, this is like, it's the time of opportunity, or should be, right? So it's a different kind of feeling. But Lori, what does this make you think?
Yeah, it makes me think a lot about the perspective of a 20-something or 30-something-year-old, because I think they feel like, you know, now is my time to do these things, and I have to get this, like, my career in place, my relationships in place, everything in place right now. And so putting this off for a few months or even a year feels like an extraordinarily long period of time. But in the scheme of their whole lives, because they're so young, they don't realize that it's really not a long time in the scheme of their lives. And I think that perspective will help a lot, that this one, if it's, you know, however many months or this 1 year, however much you're getting delayed in your plans, it's not that long in the long term. So that's one thing. And I think the other thing is there's a difference between productive anxiety and unproductive anxiety. And productive anxiety is when you're reasonably worried about something, and so you can take action to help alleviate the anxiety. So we're reasonably worried about getting this virus, and so we're washing our hands, we're social distancing, we're following all the guidelines. Unproductive anxiety is excessive rumination, like you're obsessively ruminating about something. And I think that a lot of people in their 20s and 30s are spending a lot of time ruminating about, well, what does this mean for my future? And so they futurize and they catastrophize. They come up with stories about how this is going to impact them. And these are things that haven't happened yet and may never happen. These things that they're worried about. So they're creating these stories of like what's not going to work out for them, but it hasn't happened. So what I would say to them is you need to stay grounded in the present. What can you do in the present to prepare yourself for what you want later? So those are going to be those skills like resilience, adaptability, flexibility, making sure that if you want to do something with your career, you're doing whatever you can from home to prepare for that career. You can take online classes. You can start looking at different companies you might want to work for. Do that research, get your resume going, all that stuff, so that when the time comes, it's ready. And I think the other thing is in terms of relationships, if you want to do virtual dating, which a lot of people are doing, even though you can't meet people right now, it's really good practice to learn something about yourself and learn about, you know, what happens to you, and are you learning something about you in relation to others, so that you'll be really prepared when it counts, when you're going to go out with these people, when we emerge from this.
I mean, you bring up something in that advice about how we perceive this time, which is, I think, week one, I was thinking of this as like a pause button had been hit. We paused real life and we will unpause when things are safe. And the longer this goes, the more it feels like, no, this is life. And it's, there are things I can be doing to enrich my life or try to make it better without putting too much pressure on myself while I'm here, while I'm even in my house. And but I imagine that for young people who have been told go, 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 it's very difficult to feel like you're doing right by yourself by standing still. And I can imagine that's super frustrating. And related to our next question, Carolyn asks a question I love, which is, what will we do differently as a result of this quarantine? And I think about that all the time, talk about ruminating. In possibly some helpful and unhelpful ways, but what will we take from this?
I think we're going to take a lot of really positive things from this. I think, first of all, we're really forced to strip down to the essentials. So what really matters to us and who really matters to us. And I think you're learning, who are the friends who are showing up for me? Who are the friends who are really there in this time? What is important to me in terms of taking care of myself that I never spent the time doing before, and what do I want to carry into normal life, when we emerge from this? What are some practices that I'm learning now about my strength that I didn't know that I had, about my ability to be creative, be adaptable? What are some things that I'm discovering about myself? So all of those things I think are really important to carry through. And I think the biggest one is compassion. And I've said this multiple times in our conversation, but it's worth saying 1,000,001 times. Having compassion for yourself is going to help you so much in life, in every aspect of your life. And having compassion for yourself doesn't mean letting yourself off the hook or not being accountable. It's just that self-flagellation never leads to any growth. People think, the harder I am on myself, the more I'm going to grow and change. No, the more compassionate you are, the more you're going to grow and change. And so I think we are forced to practice compassion right now. So it's really good practice for when we get back into the hustle and bustle of daily life.
This is from an anonymous college student who says, there is so much work and so much less structure now that all the classes are online. How should I deal with this without getting completely stressed out?
Yeah, I think you have to manage your expectations. I think that, I have a son who's in 8th grade, so it's not the same as college, but he, I think that the teachers are being very accommodating in the sense that they know that things are just not the same. So everybody's doing their best. And I think all you can do is your best right now. And yes, a lot of people are experiencing a lot more work because teachers are worried that, and professors are worried that people are going to be bored. And so you can communicate, you don't have to be helpless. You can communicate to your professor and say, hey, this workload seems like, I'm really getting overwhelmed by this workload. I don't know if you realize this is how long it's taking me. Do you have any suggestions? Maybe they don't even realize that they're giving that much work. I think that we're not helpless in these situations. People are experiencing this with their work, their professional lives too, where they feel like their bosses are expecting them to work from home in the way that they would in a normal situation. And you can't get that much work done when you have other things going on at home and everything's disrupted. So it's really important to communicate to your boss too, hey, this is what I can do. This is what I can't do. I want to let you know what's going on so we can make sure we can, we're on the same page.
And I imagine this trickles down too, right? Like for professors who are assigning everything online for the first time, it's getting a sense of, well, what is normal, and making sure that the people who oversee them know that they're actually teaching, and this might take a bit. And I guess we'll see how this plays out in the fall as well, depending on whether everybody can go back to school. But I think you're right. It almost seemed like there was no adjustment time for some people as they figured
right. And I think, remember too, that the professors are going through a really hard time in their own lives. And so they think, oh, well, I want to make sure that I'm doing my job and that these kids are learning. And so they're assigning all this stuff, but they don't know how long it's taking you. So if you tell them this is taking me this many hours, I don't know if you're aware of that. And I think most people are willing to adjust.
We had 2 questions come in that are similar, and one from a reader who read your book and talked about your sort of journey in therapy for yourself and having the benefit of calling colleagues and saying who might be a good therapist. And she asks, this isn't so easy for some people. And when somebody says to you, I need help and I need to go find someone, how do you go about doing that? What do you tell them? And is there anything you can tell us right now about how you do this now in a world where it's not like we can go into a place or, that, we touched on this a little bit in past sessions like this, but I think to really start from scratch about, for someone who has never had therapy, what's the first thing you do to find it?
Yeah, I should say right away that the scary thing I think for people about finding a therapist is they worry that it won't be the right person. And so your first session is always a consultation. Just because you go and make an appointment with somebody, and whether it's virtually or whether it's in person, it's kind of like dating. It's like a first date. And so you are not in therapy with that person. It's really an opportunity for you to see, do I like working with this person? Did I feel understood? Do I feel like this person kind of gets me in whatever way a person can get you after a first meeting? And then go back for a second date or session. And you don't really know if you're in therapy with this person until you've had a lot of experience with this person. So, you've maybe been going a month and you feel like, yeah, this is the person I want to talk to. And of course you can leave at any time too. So I think the pressure is off there in terms of making sure that it's the exact right person the first time. And in terms of even knowing who to call, when we're not in coronavirus times, I will often say to people, look at somebody that that you think is doing really well in their life and they go to a therapist. Don't pick the person who's always saying like, my therapist says this, my therapist says that, and they're kind of a train wreck. Don't ask that person. Ask the person who seems like they really changed. They're really handling things much better now. And I know they're going to therapy. And that doesn't mean that you're going to go to their therapist, but because they might not want you to go to the same therapist, but their therapist can give you a recommendation. And that's probably going to be a really good recommendation. So that's one way. You can do that in the time of coronavirus. But another way that everybody has access to is most clinics are, if you look in your local clinic, wherever you live, and you go on their websites, most of them are offering free virtual sessions, either groups or individually, with the trainees or the clinicians who work at those clinics. And I would look into that because even if your clinic isn't offering that, they usually have a page of resources of therapists you can find who are doing virtual sessions.
I also know that, I was looking for a new therapist after seeing the same therapist for like 10, 15 years, and it was time for a change. And my own primary care physician, when I spoke to her about it, said, let me come up with some ideas for you, that that my physical health was so much connected to my mental health that it was not a question she had never heard. So that's super helpful. Thank you. I love this question that Joe asks. Besides your own books, this is the two of us, are there others you recommend? And I have an answer, but you go first.
I think that a good novel is the best thing that you could do. I think that novels are a way for us to go somewhere when we can't go somewhere. So they transport us to another place, another time, another person's world, and we really need those emotional breaks. I talk a lot about our psychological immune system. So we're so, concerned about our physical immune systems right now, but we also have to bolster our psychological immune systems. And if we overload our psychological immune system with all things coronavirus, we're going to get emotionally sick. So a good novel, I could name a million good novels, but everybody has different taste. So I would say invest in a good novel.
Yeah, I was going to say romance novels specifically, but everybody gets happy endings and things usually work out. During all of this, I've been reading my favorite historical romance novels and my favorite paranormal romance novels because, vampires don't have to worry about so many things that we have to worry about. And yet I talked to some friends who were having trouble reading at all. And what would you say to someone who is having a difficult time enjoying the hobbies they normally like? That the normal escapism, they can't get through a TV show, they can't read, they can't write.
Yeah, here's a great idea. Find a new hobby. because the old hobbies are associated with a different time, and doing something new forces your mind to focus intensely because you don't know how to do it yet. So if you want to learn a new language, if you want to learn an instrument, these are all available virtually to you right now. And there are a lot of ways to get free lessons on this. And it occupies your mind because you have to concentrate in a way that you're not used to doing because it's new material to you, and it'll help you escape for, an hour a day or however long you spend on it.
Okay. We have a question. How do you respond when someone virtually ghosts you? Meaning you've been chatting online, maybe had a Zoom date or were planning one, and then they stop responding. Most likely they're not out having fun with someone else somewhere. Is ghosting during a global pandemic different from ghosting during normal times?
I don't think it feels different, meaning it hurts. And the thing about ghosting is you're always left wondering why. And that's the problem with ghosting is like, you wonder, you think it's about you when really it's probably about them. What was happening. And I think sometimes, it's probably more prevalent right now because most people are feeling like, okay, we had these conversations, they were fine, but we can't really see each other or meet. And we don't really know, like what's the point? And so people get bored. People get bored having conversations with strangers that they don't know if they're ever going to meet. And there's so many people to talk to, they'll say, okay, I'll go talk to a new person. That's what I'm finding, because I'm hearing from people who are doing the ghosting, some therapy clients, and they're like, yeah, I just stopped talking to her because, like I didn't know what else to talk about with her. We're strangers, right? So I wouldn't take it so personally. I think it's hard to make contact with people through a screen.
I mean, it's so interesting, the piece of the narrative about, I know they're not out doing something better. And in normal circumstances, this whole story we tell ourselves about, well, maybe there's something I did, maybe they're busy, at least now there are sort of answers that come with it. If someone doesn't respond, they're really not going to. It's probably not that they're at a meeting or, but I think it probably feels, you're right, exactly the same. And just reminding people that the Q&A button is all for the taking. Okay, this is from Anonymous. Any tips for developing self-compassion during this time, particularly with body image? And this is something I see on social media a lot, right? Like some people it's become the exercise quarantine, and for other people, they feel shamed for wanting to eat certain things, and it's hard to like actually do for somebody like me who like can't really get motivated unless they go to the gym. I'm like, well, it's just been difficult. So is there a good way to remove that kind of pressure from the narrative?
Yeah, I think it's helpful to remember that you're the one putting the pressure on yourself, that nobody else is doing that. And then to listen to the voices in your head and what they're saying to you, because the voices in our head can be so incredibly cruel in a way we would never talk that way to our friend who was eating the same thing or not exercising or whatever the issue is. We would never feel that way about them, talk that way to them. So why are people bullying themselves so much? And I think that has to do with a bigger issue about how they feel about themselves. So try to remember to be kind to yourself. How would you talk to a friend in that moment? If your friend was feeling down about how they were around food or exercise, what would you do to comfort them that felt authentic, but also kind? And the other thing is, get outside, not because you need to be exercising in a way that doesn't feel normal to you, but because fresh air can really help. It just helps reset your mind. It helps your body to feel better. So if you can just, put on a mask and take a walk around the block in an area, socially distanced from other people, just go do that. And I think people think it's all or nothing. They're either like exercising, like they're going for a run or whatever, real exercise is, or they're doing nothing. There's a lot in between there to just be mindful of your body in the sense of, how can I be kind to my body? Not how can I make it look different, but how can I be kind to it? And being kind to your body is, I'm going to go get some fresh air. I'm going to go get some sunlight. I'm going to walk around the block. Maybe I'll listen to a podcast on my phone while I'm walking around the block.
When you bring up going outside, it makes me think of a conversation I had yesterday with one of my colleagues who's a bit younger and wonderful. And she lives with her boyfriend in a very dense part of Boston. And I asked her, she said, I'm so tired lately. And I said, well, have you been getting outside and getting your sunshine? And she said, it is absolutely impossible to walk outside where I live without really being bombarded by people. And my sister experiences this in New York, where the sort of luxury I have in my neighborhood of maybe taking a walk without anybody in my way is just not there. What do we have to worry about in terms of mental health when we're in a place where we really can't get outside? And are there other ways around it?
Yes. So first of all, make sure that you get some sunlight, even if you're inside. So, can you open the windows a little bit? Can you hang out under the window and read a book under the window or work under the window or whatever it is? And can you look out the window? Do you have plants in your house? Is there any green that you can see somewhere? Because that's always helpful. And I think too, just moving your body inside in fun ways. Like a lot of people are doing these virtual dance parties, or just turn on some music and while you're cooking and, dance around while you're cooking. It sounds like it's something out of a romantic comedy, but it doesn't have to be. We actually, it really boosts our mood when we turn on some music, we go into a different space with the music and we move our bodies. And it's not about getting, exercise in that way. You're not doing like an exercise video. It's just, you're having fun. And so it can be fun to move our bodies, and it also can help us feel better. Just, moving around is good for our bodies.
Juliana asks my favorite question of the day so far. It's a very short question. It says, why all the bread? And I think she's talking about the fact that everyone I know is like, I'm going to bake. There's something with the sourdough situation where people seem to be finding a lot of solace in making bread from scratch. I will never do this, but what is with all the bread?
Okay, first of all, food is comforting. When you think of childhood, right? It's a lot of like food as comfort. So I think it's okay. We want comfort. So if you want to bake bread and it's a fun activity and you feel like, you're doing something you don't normally have the time to do, that's great. It's a fun activity and you get to eat something delicious. No problem with that.
This is from someone whose friend just became a widow during this time. And this is just making life a lot more difficult for her. So she says, how can you help a friend like that when you can't be physically present?
Yeah. So you can still, love still travels in a lot of different ways. And what you want to do is you want your love to travel to this person. So you can travel to this person by calling them. You can send them some things to know that you have them in mind. You can, I don't know how far away they live, but you can get food delivered to them. You can get chocolate delivered to them. You can get, there are certain things you can get delivered that are very comforting. But also I think just sharing presence with them, being present with them, whether it's on a screen, whether it's on a text, whatever it is, just making sure that you don't forget about them, that they want to know that you have them in mind. And you can't take away their pain. And that's the other part of it. Even if you were physically present, you can't this person is going to have to feel their pain right now. And so you can be there and show that you love that person, but the person is going to go through their grief.
So this question is from Mary. I'm having trouble sleeping soundly. I've read all of the standard advice. Do you have any other ideas?
Yeah, be easier on yourself. Manage your expectations around, it makes sense that you're not sleeping soundly right now. So are you doing the things that you can do during the day about sort of making sure that you're taking care of your emotional health, because that will help you sleep better? Are you moving your body a little bit during the day, because that will help you sleep better? Are you having some kind of social connection, however that is, during the day? That will help you sleep better. Are you getting some private time? We all talk about how we don't have any, how we're so isolated. And yet I think what some of us really need is some private time where there's nobody talking to us or calling us or texting us. And we can just have some time to hear ourselves. All of that will help you sleep, but also not to put so much pressure on anything being normal right now, whether it's eating, whether it's exercising, whether it's sleeping. It's going to be a little funky right now, and just accepting that will probably help you.
I have to wonder, when this started, there's an area where in my place where my sister sleeps and guests sleep, and I started sleeping there the first night like it's not my bed, and I've slept there every night from the start of this. And I started to think, well, maybe I'll go back to my own bed when all of this is over, or when it's safe. And I wondered about the psychology of that. Like, I sleep pretty well right now, but I think it's because I'm not in my own bed, and I don't know what that's about.
Yeah, I mean, that's the newness. I think that when you make sort of a coronavirus normal for yourself, that's different from your regular normal. A lot of people are finding that helpful. Like, what is my routine now that's different? So a lot of people say, oh, you need structure, you need a routine, right? But a lot of times what I think is most helpful is having a different routine than the routine you normally have, because your new routine is going to help you get into feel secure and safe and contained around, this is what I'm doing right now, and it's temporary, and then you can go back to your other routine. So I can see why that was helpful for you.
This is from Allison. My adult children are living with us right now and want to be treated as adults, while their behavior has regressed in many ways. Any advice for keeping the peace while still holding the kids accountable for contributing to managing the household?
Yes. So we all tend to regress when there's a lot of stress. Just think of going home for Thanksgiving or going home for, the holidays, right? When you become 16 again. Well, I think that all of us are regressing in different ways, but especially young adults who are home and they're used to being adults, but now that they're home, they're going to regress into sort of these childhood roles. It's your house. You can still set the rules. You can still have certain expectations with your adult children, because they're accountable. Just because they're in your house doesn't mean that all of a sudden they get to live the way that they live in their own homes. They're actually in your home.
I imagine this is really hard for, well, certainly young adults, meaning 20s, but also for college kids specifically who just had a taste of independence and then came home really early.
That's what I'm hearing a lot about, is college kids who are coming home and they were really enjoying their independence and they were really enjoying having this different life, and then they come home and all of a sudden they feel infantilized in their childhood homes. They're dealing with a lot of grief and loss of missing lots of things that they would be missing at school, but then also all of a sudden they're losing also the loss of their adulthood, the loss of their independence that they had waited so long for.
I've been thinking about the amount of time I spend on Zoom, and ironically, I know telling you this on Zoom, but specifically with a lot of people, that there's, if I'm on a call with two friends, we'll say, oh, we should invite this person in. And by the end, I wind up having some of the same social fatigue and social anxiety I might have when we're allowed to leave our homes. And yet it feels like every social request is a lifeline, and that you should say yes to everything when you're a single person living alone extends to this distance world. How do you sort of govern for yourself how much Zoom time you should be having, what feels comfortable, what's good, if there's a day without, if that's okay? I'm still learning what I can handle in a day, and for some reason I keep feeling more social than I've ever been.
Yeah, there's a lot of social fatigue, actually. So, I think that a lot of people feel like I have to have every minute scheduled, or if people invite me to things, I have to say yes because it's good for my emotional health. Too much of it is not good for your emotional health. You need to gauge for yourself, how much alone time you need, how much social time you need, and not. I think what happens is people are stressing themselves out by overscheduling themselves, ironically. And especially it depends on your personality. Like, some people are more naturally introverted, and some people are more naturally extroverted, meaning that some people get really recharged by having these social connections, and some people get really depleted by them if it goes over what is a comfortable amount for them.
Okay, we've got an anonymous question. My daughter had to postpone her wedding to early September and is afraid it won't happen even then. How do I help her feel like a bride-to-be when also getting her ready for possible new changes? And by the way, I did a story about weddings around Boston, and wedding planners who basically were in a war room trying to take every spring and summer wedding and move it to the fall with a 2021 parenthetical. And it was overwhelming. And I can imagine, you spoke about joy, sort of who has it worse, right? Earlier in this conversation, and how we shouldn't do this Pain Olympics. And I think about people who are guilty that this is their problem, right? That they have the most wonderful thing that's going to happen and they have to postpone it. But this is a real sadness.
Yeah, that's my advice column inbox is filled with letters like that of people with canceled weddings.
Oh,
So, and I think there are a lot of them will say, like, the first line of their letter is, I know this really isn't a big problem, but I'm really struggling with this, right? So they minimize it. It is hard because, this is a big life event. It's a big life transition. And I think, the uncertainty of knowing when that's going to happen is really stressful for people, especially because there's so many moving parts involved. There's a lot of expense involved too, by the way. So it's very financially stressful. And then it's also about, this idea that they imagined that all these people would be there to celebrate with them. But really in the fall, I think they know in the back of their heads, some people won't feel comfortable traveling. Some of their family and friends who would have been there maybe won't be there. Maybe some of them can't afford to be there anymore because, of the financial devastation that they've experienced. So, this is really stressful. There's no answer for it other than to say, we have to sort of accept the loss. We have to kind of grieve the loss and go through a grieving process and not just say, oh, well, that's how it is, but really notice that you're grieving this and go through a process of grieving it and don't feel embarrassed that this is the thing that you're grieving.
I mean, I think about it, and Lori knows this kind of community too, but authors, right? This is when you have a book launch. It's like a wedding or a birth, right? And I have so many author friends who perhaps have work that they've worked years on coming out, and they thought they'd get to go somewhere and celebrate it and promote it and tell people about it, and staying at home feels very anticlimactic, and yet they feel guilty because that's not a real problem if we're putting this in the context of the world. And I keep trying to tell them, like, the minute I can celebrate for them, the minute people can afford to celebrate, the minute they can travel, like, all of these moments aren't going to be forgotten, I guess. I really hope that all these wedding planners were telling me that they're trying to convince people to have Thursday weddings, because then they'll be able to put in more for less and to sort of keep the financials together. And I will be just as happy to go to a Thursday wedding for someone as I will to go to a Saturday wedding for someone. So I feel so terrible, but yeah.
Yeah, and I would say on a positive note, what I've seen. So, I also, and you too, we both have books, and I was supposed to open South by Southwest on March 13th. I was doing the opening keynote for it, and I was so excited. And that got canceled. And then I had a 2.5-week book tour following that, and all of that got canceled. And, I'm saying that only because people are so embarrassed to talk about this. And I don't want to be one of those people who's embarrassed to talk about it. I have so many friends whose books are coming out or have come out like in March, April, May, and they've been doing virtual book tours, but it's not the same because you write a book, you want to meet your readers. You want to be in person with your readers, and you want to hear from them and interact with them. So, it's really hard, but I think the bright side of this is that all of us in the writing community have really rallied around one another. And, I have done everything I can to help people promote their books and get the word out there and recommend them to people so that people know they're out there, because reading is such a balm during this time. And there's so much solace in reading. And so I'm, wanting to tell people about all my friends' books that are coming out that would really be helpful for them. And then there's the book selling community, right? The independent bookstores that are struggling so much. And so I want to direct people to the independent bookstores who are, sending out books. So they might not be open, but there are people there who will send out books from there. These are the kinds of, when we think about the day-to-day losses, so there's like the big losses that everybody is aware of and that we see in the headlines every day, but these kinds of daily things, like all of the people who aren't able to go to work, and that includes booksellers, that includes authors who really had work to do in terms of promoting their books and they can't.
And that goes along the lines of these high school graduations that are being missed, and all these moments of joy that we're supposed to get to have, and figuring out different ways to celebrate them, or promising that we'll celebrate them later. And so anyway, that's very generous of you to be promoting so many authors and bookstores, which are so important, especially here in Boston. We love our independent bookstores.
Yeah.
So I know we have a last few minutes, so if you have any last minute questions, please throw it into the Q&A. But I wanted to know, just on a more personal level for you, is there one thing that you've done that you've really just found soothing or optimistic, something that you've included in your routine that might not have been there before? Maybe it is dancing around to music like your Kate Hudson in a rom-com. I don't know, but something you might want to pass on to us that we might be able to try. as we're coping?
I would say two things. One is I've been kinder to myself than I have ever been. I've been more forgiving of myself. I've been more accepting of my limits and what I can and can't do. And I think we all need to do that, not just now, but always. And I think the other thing is reaching out and helping other people. It feels so good to reach out and help other people and feel like you're part of a community. You're not alone in this. And helping people is a great way to feel connected in addition to talking to our friends and family. So, if there's a neighbor who is alone, can you put dinner on that person's doorstep? Can you check in with that person? My son is doing this thing, it's called Righteous Conversations, where they pair a teenager with a Holocaust survivor. And because those people have already been through obviously enormous trauma, and many of them are in their 80s and 90s and are alone. And so what he does is he's like a buddy to a Holocaust survivor and calls that person and checks in during COVID. So there are all kinds of ways that if you go online, you can research whatever like appeals to you and find a way to reach out and help other people, because it also helps you.
Are there things that, the teddy bear thing has become, I think, a thing nationally, and certainly chalk? Are there things that people in your neighborhood are doing that you've noticed?
I think people are just being more friendly. So like if we go out for a walk, people have masks on and you can't see their smiles. And so people have gloves on and you hold up like a gloved hand and you wave or whatever. Just being friendly to people, as opposed to, I think, operating from a place of fear. So I think what originally, like I think a couple weeks ago, when people would go out and you'd see somebody, you'd immediately cross the street, which we have to do. But you glare almost, there was sort of like this fear.
How dare you enjoy this street the way I am? Yeah.
Yeah, like, that's my space, or don't get too near me, right? But I think that kindness will go a long way, both to ourselves and to the people in our communities.
All right, we've got one more question and then we will wrap it up. But from Anonymous, I have been working long hours and my husband's work has been more regular and predictable. I need some time alone to wind down after work. What is a nice way to tell him that when he wants to spend time with me after work, that I need this space?
Yeah, just like that. So people ask me all the time, how do I tell my partner this? And they say it just beautifully.
Perfectly, yeah.
Just like that. And then what I think they're worried about is the reaction, that the person's going to feel rejected, or the person's going to feel like, I don't want to do that for you, or whatever it is, right? The person's going to take it personally. And I'm going to say, tolerate their disappointment. It's okay. You can tolerate their disappointment. It will strengthen your relationship to say, I know you're disappointed about this. I know you've been really looking forward to spending time with me right now, but let's spend time, and give them a time that you'll spend time with them. But I need an hour to myself at this time. I really need that in order to be more present with you later. I need this hour to myself right now.
Well, Lori, I want to thank you so much for coming on and talking to us and talking about all these wonderful therapy things, and for your wonderful book, and for being a sounding board for so many people during a difficult time. I'm very grateful for it. And I have always felt silly putting on music as a woman who lives alone and dancing around, because it is like a full Ally McBeal situation. but
it's great, isn't it?
I'm going to do it right after we do this, I think. And a little George Michael, just something to calm me down, because I guess there are these moments where, you just have to find joy where you can find it, I guess. So for the rest of you, please tune in next week. We will have someone else helping us as well. Please look up the Love Letters podcast, which is nice and distracting because it is other people's complicated love stories. And if you have any questions, you can always write to loveletters@boston.com. And I'm at meredith.goldstein@globe.com. And thank you for your participation. I say this every week, but as someone who does live alone, knowing there are other people on the other side of this, it's just made the world feel a lot smaller. So thank you so much. And Lori, thank you for your time.
Oh, thanks for having me, Meredith.